morning and good evening to everyone. Good morning, Brazil. Good evening, Singapore. I'm Annalise, and I will be your host today on this cross-continental journey through two countries, Brazil and Singapore. Geographically so far apart from each other, but though so close in so many aspects, and such a huge potential of becoming even much closer. In a few seconds, I will hand the mic over to Thomas Felsberg, founding partner at Felsberg Advogados here in São Paulo, for some welcoming words. But before that, I would like to ask you, all of the speakers of today, for a big favor. Due to the time difference that we have between Brazil and Singapore, we have a very limited time frame where we can do this event and where participants from both countries can participate. So I would very much appreciate if you could respect your speaking time during the event so that everyone has a chance to participate. So, Thomas, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, good morning, São Paulo. Good evening, Singapore. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here in this seminar, which was inspired by our advisor, Sérgio Amaral. Unfortunately, is not present here, but he's attending our conference remote. I would like to thank specifically Lina Chang and Annelise Egger, who did a fantastic job of putting together our webinar here. I would also like to thank our sponsors, Randall Brothers, Ellen and Gladhill, São Paulo Negócios, Invest São Paulo, the Brazilian Embassy of Singapore, and I would like to mention and say a very warm welcome to our ambassador in Singapore, who is present to our meeting. Enterprise Singapore, Deep, was an association which has, I would say, the great majority of all the companies which are investing in infrastructure in Brazil, and the Singapore International Arbitration Board for their support to our event. I would also like to thank our speakers, our moderators, and we have a great attendance here in this event, and I would like to thank all the participants. I wish you all a wonderful event, and that we can establish even closer ties between Brazil and Singapore. We had very recently the visit of the Minister Vivian Balakrishnan, and they signed together with our foreign affairs minister a declaration which is a summary of all the various ties and initiatives which are taking place between the two countries, and it's really amazing the amount of interesting initiatives which are taking place. Among them, the treaty between Mercosur and Singapore, the double taxation treaty, and several other initiatives where the two countries are cooperating. Well, thank you very much to all participants who have registered. We have a fantastic attendance to this event. And let me invite Annelise here to initiate our work here.
Great.
She will be our hostess here.
Thank you, Thomas, very much for your kind words. And please, Ambassador Eugenia Batames, from the Brazilian ambassador in Singapore, would you please make the introduction to the event?
Thank you. Thank you so much. A good morning to participants in Brazil. In Singapore, of course, it's already evening. We're sitting here with our hosts, Bradell, at their offices in Singapore, the offices of Bradell Brothers. May I say it is an honor and a great satisfaction for the Embassy of Brazil in Singapore to take part. We're very thankful to to Felsberg Advogados and the other organizers for this invitation. It is a particular privilege to me to be able to greet our former foreign minister, Minister Aloysio Nunes, through whom I greet all of the participants on the Brazilian side. I understand I am supposed to present a brief overview in the most succinct manner. This is what I'm going to try to do about Brazil and Singapore, how these just the briefest overview of Brazil-Singapore relations. So the first thing I'm going to show very briefly is Brazil is, yes. Okay, so Brazil is a very large, a huge country, as we all know. Brazil covers, this is just to show viewers in Singapore how Brazil covers half the area of South America and twice the area of the European Union. The second slide gives this very general view. Of course, Brazil at 217 million people. Brazil answers for half the population of South America. So it's a large consumer market by any standard, Our population is largely urban in Brazil. So almost 90% of the population lives in urban areas. More than half of Brazilians are younger than 35.
Wow.
So it's a young population, mostly urban. Brazil is, as we see on the slide, Brazil is the largest Latin American economy and the 10th largest economy in the world. Our estimated GDP for 2023 is 2.1 trillion US dollars. That is, again, half of the GDP of the whole of South America. It's a huge country. So we are, Brazil is an agriculture powerhouse, of course, but we're not just that. We, in Brazil, we sell high quality food to more than 700 million people all around the world. Our customers are in more than 100 countries around the world. But we are also, of course, we sell to Singapore. We are the main provider of animal protein to Singapore, by far the largest provider. But Brazil is also a country that makes airplanes, cars, steel, all kinds of machinery. So it's a very complex economy. We are the largest and most developed e-commerce market in Latin America. Brazil is the 15th country worldwide for e-commerce sales, which is saying something again. And in a nutshell, all of this just to say, to convey that there is a huge potential for Singaporean investment in services and in physical infrastructure in my country, Brazil. So the next slide aims to show, the next slide, that's the right one, aims to show what we all know, Singapore. So that was a brief overview on Brazil. What is Singapore, on the other hand? So Singapore, as we all know, is the most prosperous country in Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia in itself is such a prosperous region. So ASEAN is both a very populous region at 660 million people. That is 3 times the population of Brazil. The 10 ASEAN countries together amount to 3 times the Brazilian population, which is huge. And of course, this huge consumer market in ASEAN, in the 10 ASEAN countries, it's a very affluent market. Again, the combined GDP of the 10 ASEAN countries amount to more than 3 trillion US dollars. It's actually 3.11 trillion US dollars, which is immensely significant, as we know. So Singapore itself is a much respected country in the context of ASEAN, of the 10 ASEAN economies. It is a well-respected platform for trade, for financial services, for maritime transport, for science, for technology, for innovation. It is a hub for dispute resolution. It is a juridical hub in Asia, much respected. It is a pioneer in regulation of e-commerce. So all of these aspects make Singapore particularly attractive from a Brazilian perspective. It's a match made in heaven, really. We'll soon see how. So in our next slide, we're going to see what the bilateral relationship, not to go into any detail, but Brazil was the first Latin American country to establish diplomatic relations with Singapore. Brazil was the first Latin American country to open a physical embassy in Singapore. And this was 55 years ago. In the meantime, the relationship evolved in the most positive manner. Minister Balakrishnan, of course, just came back from Brazil. I had the privilege of accompanying him to Brazil and back. His visit couldn't have been more successful. We held, Minister Balakrishnan and my foreign minister held the first political consultations meeting between the two countries. Minister Balakrishnan called on President Lula, on Vice President Alckmin, on Environment Minister Marina Silva, who is a legend all by herself in Brazil. And everywhere he went, he established he obtained the most positive results possible. It was an extremely successful visit. What we see on the slide are very positive developments we managed to obtain last year in 2022, end of pandemic. We gathered the fruits of so much that was going on for some years. We were finally able, the two countries, to finally obtain the results of hard work on the two sides. So we finally have our DTA, our double taxation avoidance agreement, so important for the private sector on the two sides. Singapore was very instrumental and very helpful to Brazil in helping Brazil achieve its sectoral dialogue partnership. So, and of course, the Mercosur Free Trade Agreement, which is undergoing the legal scrubbing process, and we're all very optimistic on the two sides. So now finally going into Brazil-Singapore economic ties, now we can finally shift
To the next slide.
to the next slide. Thank you. So, yes. Amazing as it sounds, Singapore is the 7th global destination for Brazilian goods. Second destination for Brazilian export goods in Asia. Second only to China. It's very impressive. So Singapore is ahead of much more traditional trading partners of Brazil. I myself am, when I look at this, but this has been repeating itself. Last year, Singapore was 6th global destination. Now it's 7th. It oscillates between 6th and 7th position. So what can I tell you? Singapore is this very important economy, which is actually the largest investor in China. Singapore is the largest foreign investor in China, literally in absolute terms, and the 3rd largest investor in Brazil. So Singapore is very present in Brazil, just as Brazil is very present in Singapore. On the slide, we have the areas where the Brazilian companies that are in Singapore operate, and vice versa. The areas where Singaporean companies in Brazil are most active at. We can all see what those areas are on the slide. I don't want to take too much time before the debate actually starts, so I'm not going to go into greater detail. I would show an additional slide, which is called main destinations. If the Brazilian side, thank you so much. So it's amazing, but it's a fact. That's what we've been having for the past few years. China, of course, is our main market destination. China has been Brazil's main trading partner since 2009. To China, as we see on the slide, Brazil sells 3 times as much product as it sells to the USA. So it is a little as if China were our number 1, number 2, and number 3 destination worldwide for Brazilian export goods. Then comes the USA. The USA, of course, is also Brazil's rival in selling to Asia. Because same products, large agricultural economy, large producer and exporter of agricultural goods, rivals in selling to Asia. Next comes Argentina. Argentina is, of course, our closest and most important trading partner in South America. Absolutely historical relationship and unbeatable. When we see Netherlands, that is it could be a little misleading, because Netherlands, it's not so much that Brazil is selling so much to Netherlands, to Holland, but the thing is, the port of Rotterdam in Holland is the main entrance gate for everything Brazil sells to the European Union. That explains a little, but of course, Spain is such a traditional partner for us, as is Chile, and then Singapore is there as the 7th destination for Brazilian goods. It is in Brazil, in the interest of Brazil, to make this trade relationship more balanced. We have a huge surplus, surplus with Singapore right now. It's a 90% surplus, actually. It is in everybody's interest to make the trade relationship more balanced. There is, again, my point is this immense potential for Singaporean investment in Brazil. Singaporean business, which is so important already in Brazil, to find even larger horizons from this moment on. There is nothing to stop us. I would conclude by showing this last, the summing up slide. There is a slide, my last point, where I try to, so of course, two important trading nations, each with a very important vocation for trading. Two important digital nations. Singapore, obviously, we don't even have to go into how important digital culture is for Singapore, but it is equally important in Brazil. In Brazil, digital banking, insurance, e-commerce, these things are so much into the Brazilian DNA, and not every foreign observer is aware of that. There is, in Brazil, the average person, even if it's not a person with a very privileged instruction level, I don't know, Brazilians just love digital culture. And from day one, Brazilians were all into digital banking from the first day on. It's something that is in our DNA. Important political players, each in their own region, and not just that. Both Singapore and Brazil, both Brazil and Singapore are important actors, political actors on the world scene, in their own regions, obviously, but they are well respected, each of these two countries in the world arena as countries which have a long-term vision into the future for their own societies. Singapore and Brazil value peace. Brazil and Singapore value prosperity for their own peoples, for their own societies. So my point, just to wrap this up, is that this is, of course, a two-way road, and there is infinite, I would use this word without exaggeration, there is infinite potential for an increasing investment and business and trade on a two-way road basis. And the fact that Brazil is this unending collection of opportunity for Singaporean investment, just as Singapore is this privileged and absolutely ideal gateway for Brazilian products to have a deeper, to have increased access into ASEAN, into this fascinating region, which is the Southeast of Asia, this economy, Southeast Asian economy, which never ceases growing. And so here we are, ideal, I would really say match made in heaven, business and investment wise. I'm very thankful to Bradell Brothers. Thank you so much for having me. And I believe this is what the Brazilian embassy could bring in the way of a brief, I hope it was brief, a brief introduction. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Barthelmess, very much for this very rich information and brief overview and comparison of both countries and how they complement themselves. Thank you very much. So now we can move to our first panel, and starting here left to me with Mr. Roberto Figueiredo Guimarães. He's Director of Planning of the Economy of ABDIC. ABDIC, for our participants from abroad, is the Brazilian Association of Infrastructure and Heavy Industry. So please, the floor is yours. And bear in mind to keep your speaking time, please.
And thank you, Annelise. Good morning, Brazilian people. And first of all, apologize my English. I don't have Thomas' accent, very nice accent. And I'll try to show you what Abdib is looking in this field. I have to congratulate Felsberg for this initiative, the partners, the sponsors, because it's very, very important issues we're going to see in this morning here. I show you only 5, 6 slides, and open after that to questions and to doubts. The first slide is very important because this graph, I think, shows everything. That's infrastructure investments in Brazil since 2003 to 2022, except oil and gas sector. Okay, look at the curve. There's a very huge inclination of the red one is private investment, and the blue one is public investment. You see the difference between both, and mainly after 2014, 2015, with our crisis, and this spending ceiling in 2017. The blue, the public investment was has been reduced because of the budget constraints, mostly in the federal government. But even with the crisis, the private investments can be was better since 2020. Yeah, we have 2 years with very good important increases. It's due to concessions and private-public partnerships. That's the reason of this curve since the beginning of the decade 2003. But we have a huge gap, investment gap in the table below in transportation and logistics. We have 38 billion of reais investment, for example, in 2022, but we need 224 billion investment. So the gap in the first line, in transportation and logistics, is of almost 200 billion. That's the gap. So we have a huge road in front of us to have to invest in transportation and logistics. The second, please come back one, please. Is sanitation. Sanitation is a very important issue. Everybody knows that, but the value is not as very huge as transportation and logistics area. For example, we need only 23 billion reais more than we are investing today. It's not difficult to get. Our regulatory process is improving, and I think that the most important problem gap we have in Brazil in this area is in transportation and logistics. The second slide. What has been improved in recent years? I think I was talking before here, the lower hydrological issues is very important, lack of public resources and investment needs. So the federal government, states and municipalities has to reach these PPPs and concessions law, partnership and investment program, PPI in federal government. It was very important. More autonomy of the regulatory agencies, new sanitation framework, new gas law, new cabotage law. Improvement is very important. Improvement in project structure from BNDES and I don't know how to say Caixa Econômica Federal, but as a public bank, better guarantee structures and maturity in public and private sector relationship. Today, we are more mature. The process of concessions and public-private partnerships is more mature now than it was 10 years, 20 years ago. So a concession investment increase is due to this mature process from the last 20 years. But the next slide, what made it worse in recent years? Remember the magazine Economist, Brazil takes off. I think it was 2012. No, Brazilian didn't take off because of unstable business environment, economic and political, low GDP growth in 2015 and 2015-2016 recession. And I don't know if everybody knows, but the 2015 and 16 recession was the biggest recession of Brazil every time, more than the recession of more than 1929, etc. Yes, it's very, yes, but we are here, so it's good.
Overcame.
Yes, and other problems we had, and Felsberg knows and works every day with this: legal uncertainty, regulatory step back attempts. We are now seeing the sanitation problem, a base sanitation decrease, regulatory agencies. Sometimes there are people who want to move to change the autonomy of the regulatory agencies. Economic rebalances, look at COVID and basic inputs prices, and we didn't have yet a huge program to rebalance the concessions contracts. Use of credit against the federal government, Felsberg knows that, our precatórios. Some concessions and PPPs delays in 2022 due to elections, public input prices, and uncertainty. And we have a political polarization, Congress negotiation, our political process due to is coming to negotiation, and it puts money to the federal budget. Let's see what's going to happen. This makes it difficult to perform an economic improvement, but we are alive and we have a lot of opportunities we're going to see in the following slides. Good news. You don't have, I think we have more good news than bad news. What are the good news? The new fiscal framework, it's not a dream framework, but it's a good framework. It's not bad framework, fiscal framework. National Treasury guarantees PPPs to states and municipalities. It's going to be very important to Municipio de São Paulo also, because the Treasury is going to guarantee lending from municipalities to invest in social infrastructure, for example. And tax reform, have more mature tax reform. I think we are going to have in this year, finally, a tax reform. I don't know if we're going to have the dream tax reform, no, but we're going to have a tax reform this year. More debentary use, very important to finance infrastructure, social, mainly in the municipalities in the states. And as we said in the BG before 2023 in Brasilia last month, Felsberg was there. What the authority said, all the authorities from the Ministry of Roads, ports, airports, and all of the authorities said that we want to invest in PPPs with service level agreement is very important. Infrastructure investment, railways and highways, more federal resources is very important because of the spending ceiling rule from 2017 the investment from budget, federal government is very low, but 2023 is great amount, and 2024 is going to be better. Now, industrialization and the relationship with infrastructure, energy transition, green hydrogen, sustainability, Federal Court of Accounts, Felsberg is very concerned about that. The new consensual solution and conflicts prevention area from Minister Bruno Dantas is investing in this area in our court. Is very important to solve some disequilibrium process in the concessions contract. And stronger domestic demand. As we started the presentation before, Brazil has a very huge consumer curve. So more than 200 million people here, stronger demand for our concessions and infrastructure project. And the other side, we have some legislative infrastructure agenda, infrastructure debenture, concession rules consolidation, credit debt securitization, new environmental license rules, and Felsberg works every day with all these issues, electric sector rules, and urban mobility guidelines, as we were talking before. So a great, we have a world of opportunities with this in this field in Brazil. And in the last 2 slides, ABGB has a blue book of infrastructure. We have this in our website. We have this in our platform. This is the largest and most complete survey of infrastructure projects in Brazil, the largest one. We have this. This is a cross section of December 2022, but it's alimentado. That every day we made a change in our book. What we show in this blue book, we have this in the website in English, Portuguese, Mandarin, and we're going to have in Spanish in the next weeks, all in our website. What is this blue book shows? Please, the next slide. That's the opportunity in Brazil. We have today in Brazil 432 new projects or initiatives, except oil and gas, okay? Except oil and gas. From initial study to contract sign in federal and state municipalities, 432 projects. It at about 544 billion of reais investments. In the right side, the sectors: airports, railways, electric power, communications, administrative infra, social infra, urban mobility, ports, roadways, sanitation, and others. It's a huge process. And of this, among these 432 projects, we have 179 projects you're going to spend almost 200 billion reais only in the next 5 years. So the numbers have the potential to be improved. I wrote that because every day we see new projects from municipalities and states in PPP's program, concession program. We have a very huge program and to be constructed ahead. And I said the presentation before, I wrote here, the immense room for expansion, two-way road with Brazil and Singapore, and I hope it's going to be to be very useful and helpful for everybody. So I think I use my 10 minutes and I will be able to answer some for the doubts. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you very much. And I highly recommend the Blue Book for those who do not know it. It's very rich with information. And so, may I ask Mariane Albers, our partner here at Felsberg for Public and Regulatory, to tell us a few words from the legal side.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for that, and nice to have you all here. So, as Ambassador Eugenia pointed out, we are a continental country, and accordingly, we have multiple opportunities and investments on infrastructure sectors. Investments that we can point out, so sectors that we can point out as being very interesting of receiving investments are electric power, either renewable or non-renewable sources, airports, ports, highways, oil and gas, telecom, and sanitary sector. So I will point some opportunities in the following minutes and challenges that we are facing now. There is a lot of discussion currently because, as you may know, we had presidential elections last year, and with the Labour Party in our country now, and it is more left-winged, and so it is the view of investments or of infrastructure, although it is a common sense that in order to recover our path of economic growth, it is fundamental to increase our infrastructure. It is a belief, at least of the federal government, that of a wider importance of the public intervention and in the economy. But this intervention is, we can see it, it's not to be worried about or something like that. What we expect is that, and what is being discussed now, that we will in the following years have several concessions or PPPs. So PPP is a way of having both a more public participation and also, of course, the private investment and the private sector acting directly in these sectors. As previously mentioned by Mr. Roberto, we are seeing a decrease of investments in infra in the last years, in general speaking, although the private share is increasing. So this is a good information for all of us here. And let me see. So, Rodrigo, pode passar a próxima? So the first challenge that we can mention is the election and is this political new scenario in federal level, okay? So, but although we have this different point of view now, and facing this change of federal government's vision, it is a fact that concessions and, as I said, PPPs are seen in a very positive way, and we cannot expect privatizations in federal level, but we can, yes, expect privatizations in state and municipality levels, and I will show you some opportunities about this. So what we also have as, this is a challenge that we have, but we have as a positive side of this, as I said, this favorable scenario for PPPs concessions, and the regulatory agencies are also developing in the last years. So let me start here to go more rapid. So in terms of PPP, what we have is positive scenario in terms of financing, in terms of more the agreements, our agreements and the clause and the provisions are more mature, and regulatory agencies which are responsible for organizing and for following these PPPs are more open to the view that it is important and actually fundamental to have this balance between economical and financial profits for all, not only for the public as a public service, it is important, but also for the private investor. So what we can say also is that, let me see, other opportunity. Yes, in terms of a challenge that shows maybe what I was pointing out about the political view is the new framework of sanitation. This new framework was published in 2020, and it was expected to, and is expected actually to bring a bigger participation on private investment in this sector. We have more than 200 million people here in Brazil, living in Brazil, and unfortunately more than 50% have lack of access to safely managed household sanitation facilities. So on the other hand, 8% only of the investments in this sector are private. So with this new regulation, with this new framework, it is predicted to have a lot of bids with equal conditions for both public and private companies. What happens recently is that in April or March, I don't recall, President Lula upholds some and try to modify some of the provisions of this law. But and a lot of discussions came, but recently our Câmara dos Deputados uphold this and did a veto against this modification. So this is to show that we have a safe environment, despite of what some people are saying. We have a safe environment, and the government in all levels, federal, state, and municipal, are focused in bringing private investments in this sector. So here in this map, you can see the pipeline on states, and there are huge opportunities here. So in São Paulo, for instance, we have we will have in the following months, so seeing next month actually, we will have, it shall be initiated, the privatization of EMAI, which is a power, especially hydropower state company, and in São Paulo, and Sabesp, which is the sanitation and sewage company, the biggest one here in the state of São Paulo. So we have also airport in Ceará, actually in Alagoas. We also have, in terms of energy power, we have the state-owned companies in Minas Gerais, in Paraná, and in Goiás, in the pipeline for privatization in Brazil in the following months or in the following year. And also rail, the Transurb company, that it's a rail company in Rio Grande do Sul, that is the southern state in Brazil. So as I said, Paraná has also an opportunity in electric energy. So this is to point that despite of the PPPs project and the concessions projects in federal levels, we do have opportunities also for privatization in several of our states and cities. So, próximo slide, Rodrigo. Another challenge, I could say, is that we had recently in 2021 the new public bidding law, and this public bidding law is very important since it established bidding process for all these concessions and PPPs. So it was expected to come in force now at April the 4th, but the enforcement was delayed until December. And the reason for it, for this delay, is that the states and the cities couldn't organize their own legal framework that needs to be compliant with the federal legislation. So this is a problem. What we are experiencing now, that we are in between the former law or the first law and this new law. But what we can expect, and we are seeing it now, is that with the new rules of this new bidding law, operating costs of the bidding process shall be reduced. And this is a very, very good information for us. One of other changes is that the rule, or the general rule, will be electronic bids and not face-to-face bidding. So this turns the proceeding more rapid, of course, and more cost-effective. So this is something very positive, and there are in this new law a lot of provision, a few provisions seeking modernization and adaptation of the law to new technologies. So Brazil is known as a country in which bureaucracy is very good seen, and so we love, actually, unfortunately, bureaucracy. But the new law is seeking to adapt the law and our way of proceeding to new technologies. Another point that is very important is that this law shows integrity and compliance and prevention is a must. And so seeking for more transparency in all public bids and all contracts entered with the government in all levels. There are provisions also seeking the relation between vendor and customer. So we had in the past situations in which the contract was suspended and without finishing all obligations. And the new law has provisions that shall help us to develop it in a more rapid and more business way. So it is a really good opportunity. And last but not least, what this new law brought to us was the competitive dialogue, which is this diálogo competitivo. This is it shall be a new type of procurement process. We hadn't it before in this, how it was structured now. And what is this? Actually, this is conversations with bidders who transparently present projects that seek to meet the criteria defined for choosing the best solution. We had this in the, we as law firm were part of some of these diálogos competitivos, in which the government points out it has lack in some area, and the bidders can offer and can discuss about what solutions could be addressed. So in order to have the same criterion. So this is something that shall really be very revolutionary in terms of public contracts, in which the historically in Brazil, the state appoints the solution and the bidders must adapt their technology and their services to these needs and or to these rules. Now with this diálogo competitivo, this competitive dialogue, it is possible for the private companies to show, to prove that they have different solutions for different problems. So it is something that really we expect a great revolution in terms of projects of infra mainly, okay? So, and last, so Rodrigo pode passar, we had last year the largest radio frequency bidding process in Latin America, which was the auction of 5G. And with this 5G auction, we have now a lot of opportunities in investments to help to implement the 5G in Brazil. So we have goals and to achieve in cities. We have these deadlines for the implementation, and beginning this year, and first of course for capitals, and then for large cities, and then medium-sized cities, until all the country has 5G by 2029. So, but for this,
I want to skip me if you could slowly come to a conclusion, because of your exceeding. If the time is exceeding, we're coming.
Okay. Sorry. So thank you, and if sorry for that.
No problem. Well, thank you very much. So we're now moving to Singapore finally, and also to another subject: cross-border disputes via mediation and arbitration in Singapore. And I invite you to listen to the presentation of Edmund Conley. He has a German last name, but he's from Singapore. Managing partner at Singapore's dispute resolution boutique Battle Brothers. But listen to it trying to understand how mediation and arbitration can be used as a tool to facilitate corporate cooperation and direct investment from Singapore to Brazil. So Edmund, please.
Thank you very much, Annalise. Let me get my slides on.
And just while we get your slides, just for everybody, if anyone has any question, you can use the chat. I'll be looking at the chat for our teams.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you over there whether you can see my slides. I think that's how it's going to come out.
Yes.
Can you see it full screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening from Singapore. I'm very happy to be here. We're very privileged to be hosting this event together with our legal partners, Felsberg, in Brazil. And we're very privileged to have the Brazilian ambassador, Her Excellency, here with us earlier this evening. I'd like to talk about international cross-border disputes and how Singapore can play a part in resolving those disputes. My objective is basically going to be to try and convince you to use Singapore as a dispute resolution hub when you have those contracts with the US, with China, with Mexico, with Spain, all the other people that Her Excellency mentioned in terms of your trading partners and why Singapore is a very, very good option, in my humble opinion, to resolve your disputes if and when they arise. So let's get started. If you haven't figured out already, this is Singapore. Unlike Brazil, we are difficult to find on a map. I have to draw a red circle around Singapore, and you can see that we are indeed a little red dot, but we are a very pretty little red dot, as you can tell from the picture below. There are good reasons to do business in Singapore. Madam Ambassador has gone through all those reasons. I won't go through them again. We are a trusted place to do business, as you can tell from this article. We are highly committed to the rule of law. And if you like these slides, I'm going to have a QR code right at the end. If you take a picture of the QR code, you're going to get these slides and many other points of information that you can use in deciding whether to use Singapore. We are committed to the rule of law. We're ranked very, very highly, 98.6 percentile rank in the World Bank's rule of worldwide governance. Our courts are very well trusted. We tend to resolve disputes in a very, very efficient way. In a short period of time. And in Singapore, we have Singapore law. And for those of you who do not know what Singapore law is, well, have a look at English law. Our legal system was built largely around the English system, and our Singapore law follows English law principles very, very closely. There's a great degree of harmonization between England and Singapore in commercial matters and contract law. And we are a common law jurisdiction, which means we have judges who make laws as well as the people in our parliament making written laws as well. We, in terms of contract law, our contract law, if you were to choose Singapore law as the law governing your contract, it's very, very similar to English common law. Nothing unfamiliar there. If there's no Singapore authority on point, we tend to look at English authorities for guidance. And again, our written laws, many of our written laws have been incorporated from England into Singapore law. If you were to look at an English law governed contract and a Singapore law governed contract, you'll find that they're virtually identical, except perhaps for the governing law clause and references to certain written laws or statutes, which we have in Singapore, which are a little bit different from England. But by and large, for commercial matters, you can more or less treat the two contracts the same. So if you have a dispute, what are our offerings in Singapore? Well, you can mix and match. We've got arbitration, that's the option in red there. We have the Singapore International Arbitration Center. We have the ICC in Singapore, we have the PCA in Singapore. We are an UNCITRAL model law country, and we are signatory to the New York Convention. And I'll explain all of that mumbo jumbo a little bit more in just a moment. We are a commercial litigation hub. Our Singapore courts have the Singapore International Commercial Court as a division of it. And we are a state party to the Hague Choice of Court Convention. That means our judgments can be enforced in a variety of countries, and those countries' judgments can be enforced in ours as well. And we also will enforce the judgments of various Commonwealth countries, UK judgments, for example. We are a big believer in mediation, and that's, like I said, a very big thing in Singapore. Even before you get to the arbitration or the litigation, let's see whether we can use a third party to bring the parties closer together to resolve the disputes without having the need to go further. When I say mix and match, we have, for example, med-up, mediation, then arbitration, ARB, med-up. I'll explain all this in a moment. You go to arbitration, then you go to mediation, you come back to arbitration if you don't resolve it, mediation followed by litigation, a whole host of options. So why arbitrate in Singapore? We are jointly with London the most preferred seat in the world, according to the Queen Mary survey, the latest one. We are increasingly popular for investor-state disputes. There's no restriction in terms of which set of lawyers can appear in a Singapore arbitration. You can have Brazilian lawyers appearing in a Singapore arbitration. You can choose a Brazilian arbitrator or any arbitrator of any nationality you want. We are non-corrupt. We are pro-arbitration, which means our courts support the arbitral process. We have an International Arbitration Act, that's our main written law, which is based on the UNCITRAL model law, so you won't be unfamiliar with it. We are a party to the New York Convention. We are neutral. if you don't know where you're going to resolve your dispute, if you have a contract with a Chinese party, you have a contract with a Spanish party, and you want a neutral forum, Singapore is your choice. We are progressive, aggressive to maintain our status as an arbitration hub. Our main arbitral body here in Singapore, Arbitral Institute, is the SIAC. It is constantly innovating and reinventing its processes, and very soon it's going to come out with its new rules. More on that in just a moment. We have great hearing infrastructure, which I'll show you in just a moment. And we don't just have arbitration, we sort of link arbitration to mediation and our Singapore International Commercial Court. Maxwell Chambers, I told you we have great infrastructure. This is Maxwell Chambers. This is where a lot of arbitrations happen in Singapore. It's a very pretty building with a lot of nice architecture and a lot of good facilities, and even a robot to serve you tea. So why are we positive towards arbitration? If there's an arbitration clause, the Singapore courts will say you can't come to court, you have to go to arbitration. We will stay court processes in favor of arbitration. We take a very wide interpretation of arbitration clauses. Our courts have gone as far as to fix what we call pathological arbitration clauses. In other words, clauses that people don't really understand. We will try and interpret those clauses to mean that the parties intend to go to arbitration as opposed to the courts. Where something governed by an arbitration is not is linked to something not linked to an arbitration. For example, if you have a company case where you need the courts to make a certain winding up order, let's say, something an arbitrator can't do. The underlying dispute can go to arbitration, and then you come back to the court, and the court can make the winding up order. The court will say, well, I'll wait for the outcome of the arbitration to decide whether I should make the winding up order. So in that way, the courts can stop court processes, even if there's no applicable arbitration clause, in favor of an arbitration to give effect to that arbitration clause. That's how arbitration positive we are. But we will not force people to arbitrate. Arbitration is entirely consensual. The arbitration agreement is really important. If there is an arbitration agreement, we will enforce it. If there's no arbitration agreement, or the arbitration agreement doesn't cover an outside party, a third party, we will not force that third party to come in, because we respect the sanctity of the arbitration agreement. Like I said, our main institute is the SIAC. Their latest report can be found here. If you get a copy of the slides, you can just click on that, you can have it. As a snapshot, it is a very progressive arbitration center. It has a very diverse international panel of arbitrators. Brazilians can apply as well. And it's very competitively priced. I'll let Adriana tell you more about that when she comes on later on. The SIAC rules, the latest version, incorporates interesting features like an expedited arbitration. You get your arbitration done in 6 months. We have emergency arbitrators. If you need an injunction to stop things happening while the arbitration is going on, that's an option. We have early dismissal of claims and defenses, where the claims are unmeritorious right from the outset, or the defenses are unmeritorious right from the outset. That's a possibility to short-circuit the arbitration. SIAC facts and figures 2022, you can see that India, USA, China are the largest users. We would like to see Brazil there. So please think of using SIAC and Singapore as an arbitration seat and get yourselves on this chart. And I'm sure we're going to be able to see Brazil on this chart in 2023 or 2024. We handle at SIAC a very large spectrum of disputes, ranging from construction and engineering, trade, commercial disputes, corporate disputes. And this is the diversity of arbitrator appointments by nationality. There's one Brazilian arbitral appointment. So one Brazilian arbitrator has managed to do an SIAC arbitration again. It would be lovely to see that number increase. In Singapore, if you are arbitrating in Singapore, the advocacy of counsel is usually of a high standard. I hope I am demonstrative of that right now. If I'm not, please don't tell me. We have very limited document production, so you don't have to fear US type discovery. Counsel usually come from international practices or boutique practices or boutique teams within large practices specializing in dispute resolution, like Brattle Brothers is. We have arbitrators who are practicing counsel. We have very often non-Singaporean arbitrators hearing the case. We have a very close-knit arbitral community. English King's Council, they have a king now, can appear. I keep on saying KC, can appear in Singapore arbitrations if you want them or need them. And there's an influx of international lawyers. So perhaps we're going to be seeing some Felsberg advocates in Singapore arbitrations in Singapore very, very soon. We have our courts, our SICC, Singapore International Commercial Court, can hear arbitration-related cases. We have third-party funding. So if you are acting for a claimant and the claimant doesn't have enough money to run the dispute, then third-party funding is an option that's allowed in Singapore. We've made recent changes to uphold the sanctity of the confidentiality of arbitration in Singapore, and we even allow conditional success fee arrangements for international arbitration. Alongside arbitration, we have mediation, which is a really big thing. In Singapore, we had the Singapore Mediation Convention in 2019. That's like the New York Convention, but for mediation. And basically what it means is if you have a mediation, a settlement arrived at through a mediation, that can be enforced without having to sue on it like a contract in a court. So if I make a settlement in Singapore arising from a mediation, I can go to another state party and enforce that mediation settlement agreement as if it was, let's say, an arbitral award. I don't have to litigate over that settlement agreement in that other country. I hope Brazil actually signs. I think Brazil has signed, but Brazil has yet to ratify the mediation convention, and I hope that happens really soon. ARB is a procedure where you effectively start the arbitration. I'll show you a diagram, it's much easier. You start the arbitration, and then you go off to mediation, see whether you can resolve that. If it works, then you have a settlement agreement, which you can enforce if it's a state party, or you can come back to the arbitration and say, record that as a consent award, and that can be enforced like any other award in the 170 odd New York Convention countries in the world. Now, if it doesn't work out, you come back and you fight your case in arbitration. So that's ARB, and that is something that we've tried to promote in Singapore. I'm not going to read out all that mumbo jumbo, but that's there, and that's the link to it. We also have the Singapore International Commercial Court, which somehow the slide didn't come out on. I'm not sure why this has happened. It's very, very strange. Maybe it's boycotting me. The Singapore International Commercial Court, I'll just speak about it very, very briefly. So we had the SIC, which is the Arbitration Center. We have the SIMC, which is the Singapore International Mediation Center, and the SMC, Singapore Mediation Center. And so the courts wanted to get in on the international game. And so they set up a division of the Singapore High Court, which is called the SICC, to hear international commercial cases. Now, what's so special about this? So if you don't like arbitration because you think it's too flexible, you can opt for the Singapore International Commercial Court. Foreign lawyers can appear on points of foreign law. So if you have a contract governed by Brazilian law, you're not going to probably trust me to argue about Brazilian law. And if you want someone from Felsberg to argue, that person can appear in court before the SICC and plead points of Brazilian law. We have international judges ranging from judges from the USA, Australia, Japan, China, a variety of places. Hopefully soon a Brazilian judge, and the Brazilian judge can hear a Brazilian case sitting in Singapore. There is a higher amount of cost recovery, and they can even hear foreign insolvency cases. So that actually completes the gamut of options that we have. I'm not sure why my QR code is not even appearing there. What I will do is I will go right back to the front of this presentation, perhaps, and let you take a picture of that QR code. I don't know why this is taking that long. Yes.
We can send the QR
It's
code.
taking very, very long. But let me just come back to the front slide where the QR code doesn't appear again.
We can send the QR code on the chat.
Let me see whether I can do that in another way. Anyway, if you'd like a copy of the slides, there's a QR code on the PDF itself. Maybe I can ask my Brazilian colleagues to share that.
Yes.
Oh,
We can share, but you can also put the QR code on the chat. Are you listening to me?
Brazilian colleagues can help me stop sharing. If you have a copy of the slides, you scan the QR code, you get information on the SICC, the SIMC, the SIAC, as well as the SIAC report and everything you want to know about resolving disputes in Singapore. So I hope I've made Singapore an attractive place for you to resolve your disputes. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Edmund, very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Ele não tá ouvindo. Eu sei que o nosso microfone.
My Brazilian colleagues help me turn off
Yes,
my...
can you hear us? Can the participants hear us?
screen sharing.
Can you hear
Maybe you can
us?
come over here.
For the participants?
I can't hear anyone actually.
Estranho.
The other participants, are you listening to us?
Here.
Okay, Thais says, I think it's at Brandon Brothers. Okay, thank you, Diego. Thank you for the others. Well, thank you, Edmund. You're not listening to it, but you certainly convinced us to start using CF mediation and arbitration clauses in the contract we draft. So now we will move to our roundtable and Q&A, which will be moderated by my partner, Lisa Schlitzler. She's partner for energy here at Felsberg, with the participation of former Brazilian Minister of Foreign Relations and former governor of the state of São Paulo, Aloysio Nunes, who currently presides São Paulo Negócios, which is the investment and export promotion agency for the municipality of São Paulo, together with Raquel Rocha, who is investment manager at the agency. Adriana Uzdon, who is in Singapore, and she's director and head for the Americas at the SIAC, of which we just spoke about, the Singapore International Arbitration Center. And last but not least, my partner, Marcos Mathiucci, who is the dispute resolution partner at Felsberg Associados. And the speakers will also...
Yeah, let's go switch. In the meantime, I'd like to thank Annelise, Edmund, Roberto, Madam Ambassador Eugenia Bartelemes, and Mariane for your excellent presentations. And thank you all for being here with us and participating in this discussion. I do encourage everyone who has questions to pose questions in the chat. Well, I'm going to start with Aloysio and Raquel and talk about the framework and the opportunities in the municipality of São Paulo. My world is an energy world, but besides renewable energy, the green economy encompasses several other sectors and opportunities and sectors that can benefit from sustainable new technologies and initiatives. What does the municipality of São Paulo have to offer in terms of business opportunities in sustainability? I know that you have an excellent program and initiative in urban mobility, waste to energy. So I would like you to go over some of these.
Thank you. I will share with Raquel, because Raquel is all aware and those projects, partnership between City Hall and private sector. Yeah, we have indeed many initiatives already accomplished. Our public transportation system is already contracted by private dealers. And we start now a program to replace buses that are moved by fuel, by clean energy, especially electric energy. We have an enormous number of buses in São Paulo, 13,000 buses. And we start this program by 10% of this total. We have not yet very important and established system of circular economy, especially to take advantage of the enormous amount of waste that we produce every day. But is enormous potential of partnership with our municipality and of partnership with the private enterprise that are already dealing this system. We can provide a connection between Singapore investor and the enterprise that run the transportation system, sanitary systems, and other fields of our administration. We have an advantage at São Paulo City Hall because we are very healthy financially. Our municipality can provide a leverage private investors who are engaged with us in those program implementation. São Paulo, not only São Paulo City Hall, but the São Paulo State also. And I think that the presentation had facilitated a lot our job.
Yes, it was a good introduction.
It's a good introduction. São Paulo is city of São Paulo is 12% of Brazilian economy. A very modern economy, modern administration. We have here system of control of
the contracts.
Of all contracts. We have the fiscal security for all investors who are invited engage with us, and many programs already launched. We started the electrification of our education system by project of introducing solar energy to provide our schools.
Distribute energy.
Yes.
It's a project of distribute energy.
We start already with our health centers and start schools. I think that listen to what our ambassador said, that we have infinity possibilities of connection to this city-state, Singapore, and this city is the center of Brazilian economy. Especially because we have a very diversified economy. We replaced in the last 30 years an economy based on heavy industry in an economy based on service, financial service, commercial service, legal service, health service. We have a very important environment of for improved innovation, including University of São Paulo. Thomas Felsberg is the son of this university. But after we left the university, Thomas University provides a pipeline of vision of brains that who are the headquarters of ending the production for any price based on technology of communication. So I think that we have enormous horizon to improve our relationship with them. involved in Singapore. But you can.
No, yeah, I would just.
May I just, would you please just speak a little bit louder?
Of course.
Because some, well, I'm having trouble to listen.
I am
No,
an old man. I
I would just like to add that even though the city at the moment has most of its services already handed out, already privatized as services, the agency can always do a sort of presentation of new solutions and specifically new technologies in those sorts of services. Even though we're talking about waste collection or public lighting, public parking, parks, all of those projects have already been conceded. But whatever solution Singaporean business people have to present to the city, we'd be glad to be a bridge of conversation and sort of present the local business environment to them.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much, Aloysio and Raquel. And Edmund mentioned that I was wearing the Singapore colors and it was not intentional, but now I understand why. It was meant to be, right? São Paulo has a lot to offer to Singaporean businesses. Thank you so much. Yeah, São Paulo, we're all matching.
Yes.
Yeah. I like to,
like Ambassador Eugenia said, a matchmaking heaven.
matchmaking heaven, yeah. And I'd like to turn to Adriana Uzon, the director and head for the Americas at the Singapore International Arbitration Center. Very nice to meet you, Adriana. What are the SIC's expectations with respect to Brazil? Are you planning to offer any competitive advantages to Brazilian companies willing to elect SIAC as the arbitration court in their contracts? How do you view that? What are your expectations generally?
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, it's all nice to meet you. Thank you to Felsberg and Bradel Brothers for having me here today. And it's my pleasure to be sharing this session with my esteemed co-panelists. So Edmund earlier helpfully introduced SIAC. So SIAC, so for those that are not familiar with us, we are an arbitral institution that provides case management services to the business community. So our role consists mainly in assisting the parties throughout the entire arbitral process in an administrative capacity. So from the appointment of the arbitral tribunal or your judge that will decide the case to handling the financial management. And we are also one of the few institutions that review awards. So to answer your question, we are definitely expecting more growth in terms of arbitration in Brazil. And that's why SIC is really giving particular focus on Brazil with the opening of our Americas office in New York. Brazil is a very promising market for us. I read that arbitral proceedings in Brazil increased by more than 600% in the last decade. And we are expecting to see more growth because of the increase in trade between LATAM and Asia. This was discussed earlier by Madam Ambassador. Brazil is Singapore's largest trading partner in Latin America. And Singapore is Brazil's largest trading partner in Southeast Asia. So Ambassador earlier also mentioned the ties between Singapore and Brazil, including the Mercosur-Singapore Free Trade Agreement and the ratification of the elimination of double taxation agreement. So all of these things, we expect to see an increase in the trade between these jurisdictions. Brazil, again, as Ambassador mentioned earlier, is the 10th largest economy in the world, and with China as its largest trading partner. And this is really, I feel, the sweet spot for SIAC. So while we are a global institution, we have parties from more than 100 jurisdictions. I think SIAC is very well placed to handle cases with an Asian nexus. At SIAC, we have, in fact, handled several cases from Latin American countries, including Brazilian parties in the areas of corporate and international trade. And usually what we see is that the counterparties involved in these cases are from Asia, such as India, China, and Singapore. SIC has been, actively visiting Brazil for some time now. We have been working closely with our Brazilian court member. Her name is Karina Goldberg, and to explore really ways to better engage with the market and understand how best we can serve their needs. Now, in terms of your question on competitive advantage, we are definitely exploring ways to make SIAC more appealing in Brazil. In our engagements in the region, we are seriously taking feedback and understanding what is important for Brazilian parties. I was in Sao Paulo late last year with our registrar, Kevin Nash, so he is the equivalent of Secretary General, where we, of course, met Tomas and Annalise. What we found is that there is some focus on ethics, transparency, and cost effectiveness. So inspired by our engagements in Brazil, we are currently reviewing our arbitrator ethics policy with a view of strengthening it. We are also in talks with one of Brazil's leading universities, FGV, to help us get feedback from them as regards our ethics policy. We are also looking into increasing our pool of arbitrators from Brazil who can better service Brazilian parties and also from the region, taking again into consideration concerns and feedback that we have received when we were in Brazil on repeat appointments in the region. The other thing, and one final thing I guess I would share, is that even if SIC is known to be very cost effective, and I know Edmund has mentioned this earlier, there are studies out there saying that SIC is in fact the most cost effective from amongst the major institutions out there. But even then, we are also currently exploring options. And we just had this meeting today on how to make it even more cost effective for certain jurisdictions such as Brazil, where we understand that international payments made by Brazilian parties would be subject to about 23 to 27% tax when they make payment outside. So that leaves your Brazilian party at a disadvantage as opposed to a party outside of Brazil. And of course, we want to take into consideration currency fluctuations that needs to be factored in. So we are really hoping with the opening of our New York office that we are able to serve not only the US market, but it's really a springboard to Latin America, and that we want to bring SIC closer to the region's time zone for users to have real-time access with us. We have delocalized the seat in our rules to make it clear that we do not require parties to arbitrate physically in Singapore. And of course, as Edmund mentioned, there are a number of reasons why one would want to consider having Singapore as a seat, which is now, again, ranked #1 in the world alongside London for a reason. But SIC proceedings can take place in Brazil with Brazilian arbitrators, Brazilian counsel, and seated in Sao Paulo or elsewhere. And with the growing use of virtual arbitration, I think we have become even more accessible. So I know time is running out. What I wanted to share in this discourse is that for us, for SIC, it is a long-term engagement with Latin America. We are committed with the Brazilian market, and events in this discourse like this is really important for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adriana. That's excellent news. Bridging the gap is very important to us. I think all Brazilian economy and businesses could benefit from this. And I'd like to my partner, Marcos, to add his views on having multiple chambers and seats of arbitrations. How do you see this coming?
Thank you, Lydia. Good morning and good evening to everybody. Well, certainly having multiple possible seats and realms for arbitration in relation to Brazil or to Brazilian parties is very welcome. I would say that arbitration as an alternative dispute resolution method in Brazil has been very consolidated during the last years. And we have a number of Brazilian high qualified arbitration chambers and institutions that provide very good services. Additionally, we have a group of very sophisticated Brazilian arbitrations that are dealing with arbitration in Brazil and in several parts of the world. And at the same time, Brazilian arbitration practice is very familiar with qualified international arbitration institutions such as, for instance, ICC or ICDL. Actually, during the last years, Brazilian parties have been one of the top users of the ICC International Arbitration Services. But certainly, there is always room for much more. And that's the reason we believe that the SIAC's perspectives in relation to provide the services to Brazilian parties are really very, very, very welcome. Additionally, it's worth mentioning that Brazilian legal system and Brazilian courts are, generally speaking, very positive and supportive in relation to arbitration, not only as an institution, but in relation to the enforcement of arbitration awards, both national and international. Even international arbitration awards can be enforced in Brazil with no significant difficulties. We know that in Brazil, foreign arbitration award must be first recognized, confirmed by the Superior Court of Justice, the Brazilian Superior Court of Justice, before being enforced in Brazil. But in most of the cases, I can say that it is a reasonably straightforward process. Brazilian courts are not going to render any kind of opinion or assessments or revision in relation to the merits of the arbitration award, but basically check some essential aspects like if the tribunal had proper jurisdiction in accordance with the agreement between the parties, if the decision is final, if a certain level of due process of law has been observed, essentially if the parties were properly served as a process in accordance with the applicable arbitration rules, and if they had a fair opportunity to defend themselves, and if the decision is or not contrary to Brazilian public policy or sovereignty. What I would say in terms of commercial disputes, and I'm using the term in a very broad sense to talk about arbitration in general, is very, very, very unusual. So putting all of this together, my answer about having multiple alternatives of arbitration in Brazil or in relation to our Brazilian parties is certainly very good. And the answer is certainly a big yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm handing it over
Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers today, the panelists, and for such brilliant and interesting presentations. As for the program, I would now hand over to Ambassador Sergio Amaral. He's watching us, but he could not be with us here today in presence. So I'll try to be a little bit as good as you are. But it's hard to come close. But I'll try to put in a few words a wrap up of what we've been talking about here today. So I realized Brazil is indeed a country of huge opportunities. It has the size of a continent, a high population, and at the same time, not only a huge need for infrastructure to meet the needs of its domestic market, but also to improve the country's ability to act as a commercial partner to exportation. So as some speakers spoke here today, we have, for example, a huge need to improve railways, logistics, railways for a more efficient and less costly agricultural production. We need to improve our ports infrastructure, was also mentioned here today. Also, to use natural renewable resources to produce clean energy to the world. Green hydrogen was also spoken about here today. Transportation, sanitation, we have a broad opportunities for investment. There are challenges, as Roberto mentioned, legal uncertainty, unstable business environmental, the political polarization that Mari spoke about, and the need for tax reform. You should bear in mind that Brazil the Brazil heavy industry represents 11% of the GDP, but bears 24% of the tax burden. But well, as I always hear, you always say that, Ligia, Brazil is too big to fail. So there is this bunch of opportunities that we'll mention in all the speeches today. A forecast you mentioned of 35, well said in reais, but it's about $35 billion in investment in the next coming 5 years. And there is the link to Singapore. There's a huge potential for direct investment from Singapore and for Asia in general, Southeast Asia through Singapore. Over the years, Singapore has gained interest and has been seeing Brazil as a potential market. Just to name a few companies here, Shopee, Ambassador Battleman said, we're both digital countries and e-commerce countries. So Shopee and Shine, or Shane, I don't know how you pronounce that, with its recent agreement with Coteminas in Brazil, which in my opinion will completely change the structure of the retail industry in Brazil. And not to forget the two very important players, Ambassador Battleman has also mentioned them, GIC and Temasek, the Singapore sovereign funds, which strategic investments in Brazil allows business players and Brazilian industry to have access to funds through equity as an alternative to the Brazilian extremely expensive financing by banks. We are a country of extremely high interest, especially compared to Singapore. And as we saw, last but not least, that for direct investment for Singapore to Brazil, as well as in this commercial relationships between companies of both countries and companies from Brazil and Asia in general, arbitration and mediation in Singapore is one of the tools that can help make things easier. It is reliable, and due, as Edmund said, to the proximity to English law and how an arbitration in England, in a common law country, functions. Although you're located in Asia, you're close to an European Eastern legal culture that we are used to in Brazil. Well, so thank you all very much for participating, and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow for the second part. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye and good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good
night.
evening. Yes. Night.
Muito bem, senhores.
Obrigada.
Obrigado aí pela presença de todos.